Happy Monday, guys. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the Legacy Lunch Hour. As you know, for the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about March Money Madness, and we have been talking about the different structures or different ways you can invest in real estate, from simple real estate investing as buying one simple home, renovating, and being able to buy a home with equity walking in, to the opportunity to do house hacking, which is at this point what you've known to be buying a multi-unit and then having your tenants rent pay your mortgage. And then down to the last week, we had an exciting week last week, and we had talked about the BRRRR method, where investors are buying, renovating, and then repeating the same process with the next one, but reinvesting the equity into another project. And so with all that being said, there are different layers of investment, if you will, risk and investment strategies that come behind building wealth. And what we tend to forget a lot of the times is that we talk about the financing, we talk about how we build and collect a real estate portfolio. However, we tend to forget a lot about how we protect ourselves, guys. And so with all that being said, I wanted to make sure we had somebody that was going to come on board that shares with you the different structures that are available to you and how you want to best protect yourself, because you can't work hard for all of this and then also forget about protecting yourself legally, and then one mistake takes place and you could lose it all. We don't want you to do that, guys. So with all that being said, I want to bring to you and introduce to you an attorney extraordinaire, Gary Davidson. He is the owner of Castle Law. He works with plenty of colleagues and investors out there, and he's going to certainly give to you the basics and the specifics, from simple to whatever the complex, from basic to bold strategies, however you want to do it. We're going to help you build that strategy. So with all that being said, Gary, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time to come on board and sharing your knowledge and advice to our followers here today.
Hey, thanks so much, Wendy. So when we talk about entity selection, it becomes, a fairly non-sexy or not exciting topic for all of us, and it's really something that the lead-in, hopefully not everybody has turned off their computers as a result of hearing about some attorney that's going to drone on about entity selection. So in order to engage with those who are going to be watching this video, I want to start with talking about some top-level stuff. And the top-level stuff I want to talk about is about shifting our mindset. And when I talk about shifting our mindset, I'm talking about our success formula, or our formula for success. So when people, and I represent hedge funds, private equity groups, I represent family offices. Last year, we closed 1,500 transactions. That put us just behind Cadillus as the #1 real estate law firm in the state of Illinois. And so I have to focus on my clients' success strategies. And all of us tend to spend a lot of time, the majority of our time, getting the business. Mm-hmm. A lot of us spend a massive amount of time taking care of the business, nurturing our relationships. And certainly, most of us focus our attention on getting paid for that business. But there's really a fourth element to this that my top investors, my top clients spend a massive amount of time on. And what I found is that it distinguishes the top 2% from the bottom 98%. Most of the 98% can get it, they can take care of it, and they can get paid for it. But what many, many people fail to do is to protect it. Yes. And you have to have those four elements. And so it involves creating goals, but not only creating goals, but creating plans. And those plans are setting up the proper corporate structure, and then taking the action necessary to minimize the risk and maximize the return. Only then will it become a reality for people to have that life worth living. It will only become a reality when you take those steps to protect your assets, to not have to create that legacy worth leaving and that career worth having and that business worth owning. And that really is distinguishing the top 2% from the rest of the 98%. And what that top 2% does is they focus their attention on two important components. And I don't care whether you are selling hot dogs or you're selling real estate or you're selling anything, the books behind me, the couch, the floor rug, it doesn't matter. It's all about minimizing your risk and maximizing your return. If you had to think about it, Wendy, the folks who are the most successful deliver a consistent product consistently. And so they have systems, they have entities set up so that they can deliver that product consistently and they're minimizing their risk. Mm-hmm. So, and as I kind of move through this monologue, please just jump in and kind of ask me questions. But, for real estate investors or really anyone, if you're someone that's watching this that has always had a desire to establish a marijuana distribution facility or a barber shop or a car dealership, all of the principles that I'm going to be describing here in what'll be 30 to 50 minutes, I don't know how long it'll go because I don't plan these things, are going to be applicable for every single person. So anybody who has graced this earth has at one point or another thought about establishing a business. When we were a kid, we operated a lemonade stand. And we needed to determine how much lemonade we bought. And we wanted to put our lemonade stand on a busy enough street that there was plenty of traffic. But what did we do when we set up that lemonade stand? We made sure, or at least our parents did, that the lemonade stand was not in the middle of the road, right? Because we wanted to minimize our risk. We also wanted to maximize our return. So we decided, what does the market bear? Can I charge 50 cents for this glass of lemonade? Or can I charge a nickel? Because we need to find out, as we're establishing businesses, we need to pick something that both lights us up and pays us well at the same time. Many people who get involved in real estate do so because they say, gee, look at that Wendy Lee. She puts something on the market and 45 days later, she picks up this big fat check. Well, let me tell you something, folks. That's not how the process works. There's a massive amount of grinding. There's a massive amount of failure. There's a massive number of meetings that go into this. So when we're looking to establish entities, the same thing holds true with respect to when we're creating an entity. And so many of you, we get pulled around in different directions. And so a lot of real estate investors, here's the typical call I get, Wendy. I get a phone call that says, I want to set up an LLC. And when I hear someone say that they want to set up an LLC, I'm not McDonald's. Somebody doesn't come in and say, I want a quarter pounder with cheese. They know what they want when they order that quarter pounder with cheese. They know they don't want chicken McNuggets. But when we hear someone say, I want to set up an LLC, what I'm really hearing is, I want protection. I've heard that if I set up this LLC, I can avoid paying taxes. Well, let me tell you something. First of all, there's no such thing as avoiding paying taxes. We all have an obligation to pay taxes. But depending upon the type of entity, depending upon how your corporate attorney has structured things, I think we can have a universal opinion or agreement that we want to pay the least amount of taxes as possible.
Correct.
We have an obligation to have public roads and public bridges, but we want to pay the least amount of that as possible. So when someone comes in and says, I want to set up an LLC, what I'm really hearing is that they want to have protection, right?
Correct.
And so when you're setting up, when you first decide that you're going to get involved in any business or you want to get involved in real estate, number one, form of entity. Do you want a joint venture? Do you want a partnership? Do you want a subchapter S corporation? Do you want a C corporation? Do you want an LLC? Do you want a series LLC? Do you need to get regulated with the Securities and Exchange Commission to create a real estate fund? All of these are very, very important questions. The reason I say that, and the reason I give that insight, is because oftentimes what we do is we spend the least amount of time on the creation or formation of the proper foundation. When you're building a house, it's not, the foundation isn't sexy. It's not picking out the wainscoting. It's not deciding what refrigerator you get. It's not anything that the public looks at. Yet, if you don't have that proper foundation for a house, everything else is for total naught. And so what I found is that people through, and this perhaps could be viewed as a little bit of shameless self-promotion. But I'm going to give a little bit of insight here real quick about Castle Law, if I can just take a step back.
Sure.
Castle Law is set up like a medical office. I don't actually do any of the corporate work here at Castle Law. We have a group of corporate attorneys that focus exclusively on the type of entity and the type of structure. I'm simply a real estate attorney. Since I've been doing this for 20 years, I happen to know a heck of a lot about that stuff, and I used to do it in my past. But when someone comes to us, they'll say, gee, I can go on the Illinois Secretary of State website. And for those of you who are listening, step one, pick the entity. You go on the Secretary of State website, and with relative ease, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, they ask you a few questions. You press the submit button. You can get an expedited filing, and bada bing, bada boom, you are incorporated, or you have filed your articles of organization to establish your LLC. But what people don't realize is that the Illinois Limited Liability Company Act is about this thick. Now, for context, the bridge of my nose is about an inch. So that's about an inch thick of paper. Mm-hmm. And so there's an awful lot of false sense of security when people use things like LegalZoom or go online to file this, because guess what? Didn't have this beautiful library, don't live in an 8,000 square foot house, don't have this huge 10,000 square foot office by doing closings for $500 and $600. I hate to break it to you. It doesn't matter if I'm the biggest real estate attorney in the universe at $500 a crack, I can't achieve enough money to accumulate that kind of a business. The way that I've accumulated that type of business is because people have chosen to not build a structurally sound foundation. I think about the 3 little pigs: stick, wood, and brick. And so the pig that built the house with sticks did it himself. And so long as the big bad wolf, i.e. lawyers, doesn't come along and huff and puff, the house doesn't get blown in. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if you knew this, Wendy, the average real estate investor that owns at least 10 properties gets sued during the course of their existence as a real estate investor, mm-hmm. about 3.6 times. Okay. Now, some of those may be covered by insurance. Some of those things may be, baseless lawsuits, but you still have to pay someone to get you out of it. Others could be valid. And without that proper foundation in place, the house will get blown in, because there's a concept called piercing the corporate veil. And by the way, as people are listening, feel free to put your questions in the chat box next to me. I'm seeing those. I've seen a couple questions come in. I will get to all of those questions between now and 1 o'clock. But there's a concept called piercing the corporate veil. And I can guarantee you, all of those lawyers in my office, the 17 attorneys that work for me, they know exactly what's in that 1-inch thick pad of the state statute. And just setting up the entity itself becomes a false sense of security. Just like the little pig who had his house made of sticks had a false sense of security because he was inside, he looked, he saw sticks, he thought he was good. There's a false sense of security when we establish legal entities. I feel like I'm on a roll here. I didn't even think about this little pig analogy until I started talking, but now I'm going to start using it.
It is a great analogy. It's so appropriate.
Yeah, it's so appropriate. And what happens is, what's in that shareholder agreement, what's in that operating agreement, how you form it, who your registered agent is, what all of those sections say. The most commonly used phrase is, do you have a stock or form agreement? And people just sign these things not knowing what is in there. And they're like, oh, it's just legalese. Well, guess what? It's just legalese until your ass gets sued. And then it becomes your reality, right? Then it becomes what you're governed by. And I can't tell you the number of times, Wendy, where people have not had that foundation built. They've had this false sense of security. They're not holding annual meeting minutes. They're not having corporate books and records kept. They're commingling funds. All of those things, because if you could simply just go online and then say, ha, he, you can't sue me, the world would be devoid of lawyers, and maybe it would be a better place. But that's not the world we live in.
I don't think so. We need you guys. We certainly need you guys for sure. I am of that school of thought. We need you guys.
So, this is the sort of thing that we need to focus our attention on by establishing those things. So let's walk through a typical creation of an LLC for an investor who's going to buy and hold. Right now,
back one quick question,
Yep.
Gary. I know we talked about that this is for investors, but what about those who have actually invested in a 2-unit of their own or 3-unit of their own that they actually live in? Would you also say that this applies as well?
Oh, awesome question. So if you are an owner occupant of a property, then it is not necessarily, most times, not a good thing to hold that in an LLC. And the reason for that is because in Illinois, we have what's called a homestead exemption. And so you can avail yourself of a lower real estate tax bill for a property that's owner occupied by getting that homestead exemption on a property that's your primary residence. And if you're married, you can hold the property in what's called tenancy by the entirety, and that cannot be attacked by a creditor. Wendy, if you and I owned a property, we would own it in joint tenancy. If it was Wendy and Gary, it would be held in joint tenancy. So if I ran over a pediatric surgeon with lifetime earnings of $1 billion, the pediatric surgeon could sue and take my 1/2 interest in the property. But if you and I held a property in tenancy by the entirety, if we were married, then that creditor couldn't attack that because you have to deal with my problems, but you're not financially responsible. Now, this is why typically we suggest that we own our real estate investment assets in an LLC that you and I create for the single purpose of owning that rental property. Because if Wendy Lee LLC and Gary Davidson LLC own those properties, while we personally are insulated, that asset could be divided or subject to attack by a creditor if Gary Davidson LLC becomes subject to liability on something separate that I have.
Mhm.
So in the case of a situation where people want to buy things as partners, I always suggest that you create a separate LLC
Okay.
for that purpose.
Okay.
So let's just for a second walk through what it means to create an LLC and how we go about that. So as I mentioned, and again, guys, I'm going to talk on a very high 10,000 foot level because we don't have enough time and I want to get through a lot of general concepts for you. So we're going to file that. We're going to identify if the name is available. We're going to file those articles of organization with the Illinois Secretary of State on CyberDrive, Illinois.com, Illinois Secretary of State for Business Services. Once that entity is established, we then need to create an operating agreement. We need to get a federal employee identification number from from the Internal Revenue Service. And we need to establish a tax classification status by filing usually Form 2553 with the IRS, which establishes you to be treated as an S Corp. You can also be treated as a C Corp. You can be treated as a partnership, and those are all going to be specific to the type of asset that you're buying and who the partners are. Each time it's different. Unfortunately, there's no one size fits all. So we need to consider this like this is backwards here, three-legged stool. We need the client or the investor or whoever's establishing the business. We need to have a CPA. We need to have an attorney, because what do attorneys think about? We think about risk, right? Think about getting sued. What do CPAs think about? CPAs think about money, how to maximize return. We think about minimizing risk. CPAs think about
Maximizing return.
Maximizing return. And what does the person who's going to set up this entity think about? They think about trying to get the hell out of the attorney and CPA's office and get this thing going so that they can actually start their business. But you actually need to listen to their feedback and follow their advice. And if the CPA and the attorney agree, then you know with 99.9% certainty that you're in good shape. And allowing a professional to set up that legal structure, I find is akin to buying an insurance policy. And what I mean by that is, for a single member LLC, the costs have gotten so inexpensive. Maybe the attorneys in my office charge $750, right? Well, if you're going to have an expensive, or if you're going to have a truly successful business, if you believe in yourself, it's an inconsequential amount of money. There's areas to cut costs on and shave, but if you screw this up, you have to look in the mirror. And that decision could not be tens of thousands of dollars. It literally could be millions of dollars. Now, why could it be millions of dollars? Well, if you sell hot dogs and you say, well, gee, I'm only going to make, $1,500 a month at this hot dog stand. But if somebody buys one of your hot dogs and dies of salmonella poisoning and you get sued in Cook County, the land of, everything is free and, unicorns and everything else. And some jury down there says you owe them $5 million and you say, ha ha ha, I got a company set up, and the attorney says, not so fast, I'm going to pierce the corporate veil, and you didn't follow section 12B, paren 6, small a, subsection B, ... And the judge says, oh, you know what? You didn't follow that section. You don't have legal standing. Well, then guess what? The person behind that company is liable to that person. So that's the difference between then you going straight to one of my friends who do bankruptcy and filing bankruptcy and losing everything. All for what? $750 or thereabouts. So
it's very key, guys, to understand that you really need to focus on what your core competency is. Core competency, I can't even talk. Core competency, goodness gracious, core competency is, because reality is this: pay the money that needs to be paid to the professionals so that you are protected. So the attorneys, your accountants, those two parties are certainly two parties you really need to focus on making sure that you pay, because reality is those couple of $100 that you spend is worth a multifold return of protection. Because just know this, just like Gary says, as simple as selling a hot dog, and if you don't prepare it right or it's not stored properly, it could manifest into a salmonella case, or something to the degree of you having the construction on site, and just because accidentally one of your contractors dropped a box of nails on the front and forgot to pick up maybe 2 or 3 in the grass that landed in the grass, that's a lawsuit, guys. And so just as something as simple as a spilled box of nails could cost you, right, Gary? So it makes sense to have your corporate entity, have your professionals on call or on your Rolodex, so that you know him to truly be the professional again. So again, guys, let's I just wanted to at least tap in and get segue into this comment, guys. But Gary, let's go ahead and go on to the next. So we can certainly, if we need to, guys, we can certainly make another hour, another time to add to this, because this is a very complex subject, no doubt about it. And we want to make sure that you have the ability to have the information, or we can also, Gary's made available to us and his team of attorneys to help you with all of this. So we can certainly, do you guys have an opportunity to do a consult, Gary?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, for sure. So just kind of wrapping up this segment, where I started with was talking about shifting mindset and thinking bigger. And so really setting up these LLCs in the proper way is about thinking bigger. The best analogy that I could give to everyone is, I remember in 4th or 5th or 6th grade, learning about US history. And they talked about the agricultural revolution. And the farmers were out there with a mule. Remember that old metal plow that, the mule put in the rows, and the mule drugged this plow to make those ditches. And that farmer said, I don't need to spend what maybe at that time was $75 on the new Eli Whitney cotton gin, because I'm not going to have other people do this. I can do this myself, and I can eat 100% of that individualized size pizza. In other words, I can take all of this and do this all myself. But the most successful people in the world think much, much bigger, and they say, how do we make this pie huge? How do we make this pie as big as the United States? And I just want 1% of that pie, because 1% of $1 trillion is a lot more than 100% of $100.
Yeah.
And so thinking bigger by establishing partnerships and working on what makes you money, how you can grow and scale your business and outsource the rest, it's the number one thing that holds investors back from being incredibly successful. And it's the number one thing that holds all businesses back from being incredibly successful. Realtors hire transaction coordinators. Other realtors fail to do that, and they have a successful business, but they're limited by what they can do. And what you need to focus on is success through others. So we have a question that talks about, can you do multiple JV agreements with the same LLC? Different partners in each JV. Again, this is a perfect example of someone with a question that's using specific legal terms, and what you're asking, I'm assuming, I don't want to put words in your mouth, this is an anonymous question, but you're not necessarily saying, I want to do a joint venture agreement and I want to do it with the same LLC. What you're saying is, how can I do different things with different people and what's the most efficient way to do that? Okay. Or if you're not asking yourself that question, then you need to be asking yourself that question. And so Illinois followed Nevada and Delaware about, I'm getting old now. I've been doing this. Boy, I've been doing it maybe over 20 some years. I know I've got this crew cut. It makes me look young, but this double chin here is what proves that I'm old. So Illinois followed Nevada and Delaware maybe 10 years ago now, and allowed for the creation of what we refer to as the Series LLC. The Series LLC is a separate type of an LLC. It's an LLC where you designate the ability to create separate cells. So let's just keep on the same format of Wendy Lee LLC. So if Wendy Lee LLC wanted to create Wendy Lee, so Wendy Lee LLC, Wendy's doing business, she's buying properties, you know, whatnot. And then along comes Gary, and Wendy wants to buy a property with Gary. She could create Wendy Lee LLC Series 1. And that can be Wendy and Gary. And then if Juan came along and she wanted to do a deal with my good friend Juan Loya over at Homebridge. By the way, if you have any sort of financing needs, whether you're an investor or trying to just get a mortgage for yourself, I would highly suggest, and since this is not publicly broadcasted, I can put plugs in. I would highly suggest Karen and Juan over at Homebridge. They're actually the nation's largest 203K lender, which allows you to buy a house, and as long as there's a foundation, you can get all the money for your rehab. Juan knows this stuff backwards and forwards, and so does his colleague Karen. But anyway, back to the Series LLCs. So that allows her to create a separate entity, Series 2, with Wendy and Juan. And each one of those cells, here's the beauty, each one of those cells has its own separate operating agreement, has its own separate federal employee identification number, yet it's connected to the main LLC insofar as for $50, yes, in Illinois, even with the Secretary of State, we can get something done for $50. You could file what's called a certificate of designation, and then Wendy Lee LLC Series 1, Wendy Lee LLC Series 2, you could just keep adding and adding these what we refer to is, I was just reading one of the questions. We have apparently some young viewers. We could just keep adding to this, right?
Is there a
And
limit to how many?
unlimited number of cells. The other reason that we would create these cells is, for those of you who are on with the BRRRR strategy, if I own 40 properties, I can create 40 different cells. Now, you might scratch your head and ask yourself, why would I create 40 different cells if I have 40 different properties? Well, a couple of reasons. If you ever watched Seinfeld and listened to George Costanza, George always talked about keeping his world separate. He wanted his Elaine world over here and those people over here. So those people weren't Seinfeld buffs. It's all about not putting all of your eggs in one basket, right? Because if something spoils in that basket, all the other eggs get ruined. So by creating separate cells for each LLC, if you own a property at 123 Skidoo Street and the person sues you and you get a judgment for $1 million, if you have a series LLC established, none of the other properties are impacted as long as they've been placed in separate cells. So if we think of this like an octopus, and this octopus, here's our tentacles on the octopus. This one, we just crack that off and everything else stays the same, okay? We still have our tentacles. Because this property you got sued on with this little tentacle here, you got a judgment for $1 million, you lost that house, in Park Forest, you got a 80% mortgage on it, it's worth $80,000, that's cost of doing business, what are we gonna do? So these things are real things that happen, guys. And I always get the phone call after the fact. I feel like I'm talking to my children because they always come to me after the fact and they say, I just got sued and I need to do all of these things to hide my assets. Well, that's called a transfer to defraud a creditor. And if you play Monopoly, that's like drawing the chance card that says, do not pass go, do not collect $200, go straight to jail. So there is no such thing as, I'm not Johnny Cochran. I can't say, if it doesn't fit, you must have quit. We can't pull those things off. That shit only happens on TV, right? This is something that you're going to get stuck with. So we need to have that foundation in place. It's cheap, you minimize your risk, you maximize your return. Now,
one question. Is it advisable to, I guess, two-pronged question. Is it advisable to set up your legal entity prior to purchasing? And then two, as your strategies in real estate change, if you're doing house hacking, well, house hacking would be your own owner occupied, but like with the BRRRR method, let's just say you go from switching up to working with two different types of partners or doing, not just the BRRRR method, but then now you are also acquiring commercial real estate or something like that. Is there a suggestion can you switch the type of legal entity, or do you have to have a different type of legal entity when you're purchasing a different type of property?
The answer to that is yes. It really truly depends, and I don't mean to give a legal answer, but it depends on the type of asset, depending on who the partners are, depending on how much money that asset's kicking off. But if you hold a property as in an LLC, you can always move it into a corporation. If you own a property individually, you can always move it into an entity, and the movement of that property into that new entity won't protect you from anything that's happened in the past, but once the deed is recorded, or once the deed is executed, I should say, it will protect you on a go-forward basis. So there's really, you have 180 degrees of options, Wendy, like, you know, commercial real estate versus residential versus, you know, strip centers, all of those things. There's a lot of different questions that the CPA and the attorney are going to ask to determine what most minimizes your risk and what most maximizes your return. So, I mean, that's a really long-winded non-response to your question, but it's the truth.
Well, like I said, it is really all different situations for everybody's needs, right, guys? So the key is to give you some of the information, and at that point, contact Gary and his staff of attorneys to help you set it up so that it meets what your specific needs are, because there is no one size fit all strategy, guys. So we want to make sure that, again, we're just giving you the general information. We can certainly take this to another our conversation next time, because we're certainly getting more, this is more technical, and it's going to require a little bit more information. But again, the one-on-one consult is there for you, because your situation, what your needs are, may not be on this conversation or this presentation we're talking about. And so it does need you to go offline and reach out to Gary. And so then one of his attorneys can assist you with this. So, but with that being said, go ahead, Gary. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and what I was like, the hyper technical aspects of this, like we have 2 attorneys in our corporate group who have advanced degrees in taxation. So typically, you know, we're a suburban law firm. We're not, you know, some, you know, Mayor Brown and Platt or Winston Strawn downtown where you're getting charged $700 an hour. We're affordable suburban law firm, but we do have experts that focus in these areas. So on these specific things, we're really, really extraordinarily lucky that we have 2 attorneys that have advanced degrees in taxation that really know how to do this. So one of the questions that we had is from a person that's asking if they could pass their LLC assets to their children as heirs, and can Castle Law set up an estate plan that helps with real estate holdings. Yes, most certainly you can pass your LLC assets to your children as heirs. One of the things that we all do, I did it as well, is, you know, we start out 22 years old, you know, graduating from college, or 18 years old, you know, in some, you know, in a job where we're working as a union carpenter or whatever, and we get a term life insurance plan, a very cheap plan, and then maybe we do a simple will when we're in our 30s, and then at 35 we get disability insurance, and at 37 we set up an LLC, and at 39 we meet Wendy Lee and we set up this corporation. And what we've done is we've done this a la carte approach to protecting the business. So again, we spent all of our time, the 20 to 40, we spent 20 to 50 years old getting the business, taking care of the business, getting paid for the business, but we didn't do anything protecting the business. And so when you're talking about transferring of assets to your heirs, no matter what attorney you go into, if the attorney is treating this like McDonald's, which most don't, but some do, and someone says, I want an LLC, and they create an LLC for you, we're called attorneys and counselors for a reason. And so people get sent out of law offices every day thinking they're protected, but the attorney didn't even ask questions about what the person's assets are or what their ultimate goal is. So as you go and start setting these things up, that's the next level to protecting the business, is how do all of these things fit together? Or do they fit together? And how do they work? So passing LLC assets to our children, that absolutely works if you have a plan in place, like I said at the beginning, a goal with a plan backed by action becomes reality. If you have goals but no plan, you can't hit a target you can't see. If you have a goal and a plan and you set action to it, that's when you'll achieve your reality of having what you intend to do actually occur, right? So yes, LLC assets can go to the children. We have attorneys that specialize in estate planning. Jennifer is asking me, which, attorneys never do. If she's got a little sidebar, this Jennifer is Wendy's assistant. Please answer the questions. Okay, let's see. What other questions are there here, Jennifer? What needs to be in place for a collaborative book? Is that the same as a JV? I apologize, but I cannot answer that question because I don't know what you're referring to when you say a collaborative book. If you would like to send another question to Jennifer and tell me what you mean by collaborative book, I'm glad to try to tackle that. But we don't use the term collaborative book in our firm, so I'm not sure what that means. Wendy, does that mean anything to you?
No, I don't. We can certainly, again, okay. Donna, do you have a little bit more elaboration on that question that you asked? And while we're waiting for that question, hopefully to come back to us, a Rolodex is basically it is your book of contacts, guys. So we want to make sure that you're pulling your Rolodex and getting all the contacts you need to get involved with to help you through this process. Now, Gary, just kind of going back to your presentation, LLC, CCorps, can we just kind of give a highlight of the difference? It's like, okay, if your needs are this, you can do an CCorp versus if your needs are that, it's a CCorp. If we can just kind of briefly talk about that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to summarize. So typically, if we're going to have assets that we own for more than a 12-month period, in general, we're going to want to have those held by an LLC. And the reason primarily for that is because with an LLC, we can take advantage of long-term capital gains.
Okay.
And that's at a much lower tax rate. So capital gains, the idea behind capital gains is that we want people who have wealth or people who are going to invest money, we want to encourage them to invest their wealth in the capital infrastructure of the United States. We want to encourage people to reinvest their money in US real estate, US goods, and so therefore we lower their capital gains rate. So this is not political at all. I'm just going to use his name. Please don't jump out at the screen and try to tear my eyeballs out. Why does Donald Trump invest a lot in real estate? Because he can take advantage of long-term capital gains. Because we want billionaires like Warren Buffett and Donald Trump to invest their money in the US soil. So this is a moving target right now. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of changes in Washington, D.C., a lot of discussion about increasing the capital gains rate. Personally, I'm not in favor of it. I want to keep money flowing back into the US economy, and I think that rich people are going to do what's in their best interest. If we can all agree on that concept, then we need to have things in place that encourage that rich person to invest in US soil rather than sending their money to Switzerland, right? So LLC takes advantage of the long-term capital gains rate. An S corporation is the other most typically used type of corporate structure for a real estate investor. And an S corporation would be set up by anything that's going to be owned for less than a 12-month period. That's going to be subject to your ordinary income tax rate. So if you're taxed in the 23% tax bracket or the 45% tax bracket, if you sell property in less than a year, it's subject to ordinary income. And the S corporation, S is the tax status. That's done by filing Form 2553 with the IRS. Illinois just has the Illinois Corporation Act. C Corp and S Corp is a tax designation. S corporation, that term that you hear often, is how you hold property for less than a year. A C Corp gets taxed both on the corporate level and the individual level. An S corporation, the profits and losses of the individual entity flow through and are reported on your individual tax return. So that's a lot of stuff, and it really makes me an incredibly boring person to know all of these things. But trust me, when I get off this, I'm going to go back and look and see what's going on in the NCAA tournament, because that's really what lights me up. But I'm not even invested in it. But for those who are watching the rebroadcast, it's March Madness right now. What else do we have as far as questions?
Well, the clarity question didn't come through, but I think you've answered doing the multiple JV Rolodex. We didn't know we'll get the clear question on the collaborative book versus JV, and we'll, get that answered, question answered for you. We talked about the assets. And there was a viewer that really liked our analogies. So it's about it. So is there any other highlighted points that we want to talk about? And should you think we could, expand on to a next one, or do we go ahead and take it where each individual who has an interest, we should certainly have them reach out to you as you provide your contact information, and we'll type that in the comment section as well, so it's available. That comes with any person who's going to listen to the broadcast later on down the road, so that you can reach out to Gary at Castle Law to answer any question that you have, and then we can round it back and help you with whatever your goals and aspirations are, as far as helping you with the purchase of property, as well as the financing of those particular properties. As again, whatever contact or whatever information you need, we're here to provide that, again, Rolodex of information to you, because we have been doing this for quite some time, and we want to be able to help each and every one of you who is watching from, and that's one other question I wanted to ask, Gary, but as far as the thought process goes with this particular session, is to provide you planting the seed in your head that, hey, if you're interested in buying real estate, to make sure you also look at the legal ramifications and protecting yourself from owning real estate, as well as if you are already in it. That's more than like anything else. I would suggest that you definitely get in contact with Gary at Castle Law, or an attorney, but ultimately I'm bringing one of the best real estate office to you in the state of Illinois, and that's allowing you the ability to really leverage some good experience and great knowledge that comes behind 20 plus years of experience with Gary and his team of experts. So, but as a question, my goal and aspiration is that I would love not just for anybody to purchase property, but as far as also my personal goal is, as a realtor, I got into real estate 18 years ago, and I got into purchasing property then, and I bought it under an LLC because that was my goal, to buy, fix and flip. Okay. But as my personal investments, of course, that's a whole different structure. But I want to make sure that every realtor out there who is watching this, if you are only helping your clients to buy their own inventory or their own portfolio, my question to you is, why haven't you purchased your own? We would love for you to figure out how to help you buy your own and start your own portfolio, because, hey, this is the future, and that's what we're teaching our clients, that this is our future. So why aren't you owning a piece of real estate as well as yourself? So, and I'm here to help you. We have access to wholesalers, right, Gary? So we have a lot of opportunities for you to be able to pick up a piece of property yourself. Whoever is watching, we're here for you. Okay. So Gary, as far as a realtor goes, and we're running this as a business, and is there any particular advice you have for a realtor who's watching this as interested in picking up real estate?
Yeah. So
There's no different rules. Sorry.
yeah. So first of all, align yourself with like-minded people like Wendy. You know, in every single thing that I said, with the exception of my analogies today, which are copyrighted, everything I said today, I learned from someone else. And so, Wendy's been doing this for 18 years, so she's experienced, the mistakes she's made, as I have made mistakes. And so she can share with you those things that she's made mistakes on, so that you don't make those mistakes again. Now, as I've been told, Wendy's only made 2 mistakes, but the reality is there were 2 that you could probably avoid. So, these are things that you want to do, is you want to align yourself with people. You have to analyze this stuff very carefully. LLCs, it may not be the most appropriate vehicle for a growth entity that has the potential to go public. But it may be the best entity for entities that act as partnerships. Realtors, I mean, here's a little nugget of gold, just for your real estate business. There's a threshold by which you should be taking your commissions as a subchapter S corporation rather than as an individual, because that has tremendous tax benefits by not having your commissions go simply to Gary Davidson. I'm not a realtor, but if I was, they would be going to Gary Davidson Incorporated as a subchapter S corporation, because you have write-offs, et cetera, et cetera. So for realtors, number one, if you're selling any sort of volume, get yourself set up as an S corp. You know more than anyone when it comes to real estate. So now is the time, because come the fall of 21 into 22, opportunities to invest in real estate are going to be tremendous. Short sales, short term, fall and winter into the spring of 22. Once we get into the 22, late summer, fall, we're going to start seeing our REO inventory. Interest rates are going up, inflation's going to start going up, and we're going to then have all of this inventory hit the market, because we have a tremendous amount of shadow inventory due to forbearance and foreclosures, where there's moratoriums from the CDC and Blagojevich. So what happens when properties, if you take a big, huge swath of properties, millions of properties in the US right now are in foreclosure. What happens when big properties come, a million properties hit the market? Prices are declining. Why are prices high now? Because there's no inventory. Investors can't find anything. So my biggest investors are sitting there like a largemouth bass sitting in a pond waiting for the prey to come. And they're waiting for the fall and spring of 22, fall of this year, spring of 22 to pounce. So as real estate agents, now is the time to get everything in place. So when that opportunity comes, you're going to be ready to go, and aligning yourself with someone like Wendy is the way to be.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Gary. We're at the top of a little bit over the hour. So I wanted to respect everyone's time, and as well as your time, Gary, that we are keeping it an hour for our legacy lunch hour. So thank you so much, Gary. Please provide your contact information. We'll also, again, type it at the bottom. So those who are watching, please take your pens and let's get Gary's information so you can reach out for a private consult.
I'll put that on right now, guys. And thanks. Make it an awesome day. You will achieve your dreams if you just plan And I'm here to help you create that life worth living and legacy worth leaving. Thanks so much.
Love it. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. Hold on one second, Gary. We're going to cut off here.